Amelia Malagamba, a visiting fellow from the Art and Art History Department at the University of Texas at Austin. And I'm here with Alfredo Arreguin, which, by the way, is an honor to meet you. Had the chance to find about you and your work and your family and all las historias. So the first question that comes to my mind is the relationship between your childhood experience and memories and the sort of work that you do. How is it that the memories from your childhood inform your painting?
When I was a small child in my hometown of Morelia, Michoacan, my grandmother used to take me by the hand to the marketplace, and to me it was a discovery every time, because the ingenuity of the people that makes crafts and toys and pottery, all those crafts were very interesting to me because of all the patterning in it. And the discovery of new things was always in my mind, and I was much more influenced by that than serious works of art, by the folk art of Mexico. And then my mother taught me how to draw, and she used to do all these beautiful flowers on glass. And she taught me how to do that, and I think it had some of the influence of some of the bateas that were created there in Uruapan and in Zamora, those areas there where they have all that beautiful lacquer work.
Yeah, I was thinking of the relationship between the aspects that some people see in your work as Asian influence and the lacquer of the bateas, because there's a connection also there with the Filipino floats that came to Mexico, had connections with New Spain, and los laqueados and the marfiles and all of that kind of craftsmanship came from the Philippines. And I was thinking that maybe that Asian aspect that some people see in your work come not necessarily from Asia, but from the work in Michoacan that captures that kind of craftsmanship.
I think that the reason that some of the people in the Pacific Northwest have commented on some of the Asian characteristics in my paintings has more to do with the salmon. And of course, I always loved that painting of Hokusai called The Big Wave, that I used to do a lot of my works on that have to do with salmon. But you're right, I think that they had a delegation of Chinese scholars visiting the Washington area, and they were head of departments, and when they saw one of my salmon paintings in one of the universities, they insisted that they had to meet me. So the Seattle Arts Commission called me and asked me if I would be willing to allow these people to come to my studio. I said, of course, that would be great to meet them. And they were like children, that the curiosity of seeing all this work. And the floral arrangements that I use on my portraits, there was a portrait artist there that she just went crazy. And I said, the reason you like my work so much is because I have used a lot of your designs from old books that I've found. And he says, oh, yes, I think that's one of the reasons, but the point is that we would never have thought to use these kind of things in a portrait like you use it. So they were aware, of course, that some of those designs were theirs. It's more like a recycling, you know, you get an idea and you use it, and then they learn a new technique, and the technique is simply that you dare to use it in a different form. You know, the subject matter was influenced by something, but it becomes a new work into something else. You know.
I also wanted to ask you, what is the process that you follow when you begin a painting? Because you talk about grids, and you talk about certain things that you do, but can you tell us, when you have the white canvas in front of you, how do you start the process?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I do not like to paint on white canvases. I usually do an abstract expressionistic painting first, because then it leaves a lot of this ghostly feeling into the painting, and then later on they emerge. You know, it's like having a window with different curtains, different passages. And so the first one is painting the canvas. I usually use warm colors for it, like dark browns and reds and things like that, mixed with sometimes blue, so you have little bits of cool, but mostly warm. And then I get the images that I want into it. Like usually, if it's a jungle painting, I would like to use jungle animals. And then from there on, it's never planned. I just work every day, and it's just sort of like the forest. It grows day by day, you know. You dip into that well of creativity into which you extract a lot of things out of it. And that's what happens usually in all my landscape paintings. When I do portraits, it's a different thing. I still use color in the background, but then I use grids to make it more formalized and to get a better composition. And then I use those grids to guide myself on the image, and a lot of times I overlap them on the face, you know. So you have a feeling of that when I do a portrait, usually are people that have passed away. So it gives it sort of a spiritual kind of feeling rather than a formal portrait into which you could see that some of the features disappear into the patterns and some of them are more accentuated.
When you're doing the portrait and you start working on the patterns, is there a conscious effort of relating the kind of pattern that you select with the person that you are, in the history of the person that you are doing the portrait, or it's just something that emerges?
It's something that I think that by the repetition that I do on the patterning, I sort of become in a hypnotic state into which all these patterns emerge. But when I use patterns consciously, sometimes those patterns are the wrong ones, because when you put one pattern next to the other one, a new one emerges that could be much more interesting than the ones that I selected. And then I start using that more often, and then after a while, a new one emerges. And so I have an immense resource of all these images that come at a certain time. And it's incredible, because sometimes I think that I have done this painting before, but every single painting is the same, is very different than the other one. And even if somebody will ask me to imitate the last one, it will be impossible for me, because they are very spontaneously created. You know, they're sort of like gut-feeling images that come from really deep inside that appear there.
So you never do a sketch prior to the painting?
No,
You don't work
no
that way?
sketches. No, I couldn't work like that, because then I would be too restricted to whatever thought I had there. I trust myself that something is going to happen, and I haven't had a painting returned yet, so I'm very happy. And I always like to do usually people that have passed away because the living are too troublesome. Their ego gets in the way, and they start asking me to do special things that I do not want to do, you know, because it doesn't seem natural.
There's an aspect to your work that is kind of like the trickster character to it. I don't know how to describe it because you really are making an exercise of concealment in certain characters that you put into the narrative of your work. Is it that on purpose, or is there something there that is intentional in the sense of that concealment, that kind of you have to find it, that you are asking the viewer to really pay attention and try to find the secrets in the narrative? Is there's some reason why you do it, or?
Yes, sometimes it is done consciously. You know, like I have a lot of fun when I prime the canvas different colors, and just before I start the canvas, in certain instances, I start thinking, for instance, all the women I knew. And then I start writing my mother's name, all my girlfriends, everything that I can remember about women, you know, before all these new veils of pain start coming onto it. So, of course, I don't remember that because I've done hundreds of paintings, but my friend Laura Flores, who wrote the book, my book, Patterns of Dreams and Nature, he purchased one of my paintings of Chief Paya Khan, and he spends days looking at the paint to find out with different kinds of light all these little things that are hidden, you know. But it's not only that. Sometimes, like I tell you, all these ghosts are there, and I accentuate them. I start bringing out faces that I'm imagining on the background. And then when all these veils of color or all these passages of color come into it, I subtract and add. I block things that are too obvious, and I let certain parts come through. So when people look at the painting, you always see hidden things that I can't remember. And that's what I'm very fascinated when I go to collectors' homes or a new exhibition to find, did I do that? That's weird, you know? And it's a surprise for me too, because you can't remember all these things, you know? It takes me, for the large canvases, 4 feet by 5 feet or 60 by 72 or something like that. In those large canvases, I can do a lot of things, you know, that opens up. In portraits that are small and they're more concise, I deal with the shapes, how the shapes fit with each other and what they produce to make a real nice background. And like I said, I like that ghostly feeling of disappearing sometimes parts of the face into the patterns stuff.
And how do you see your work within the whole of what we call Chicano art? What is your idea of your work within that landscape of artists and art? And how, if you had a relationship with some of the veteranos that I call the first ones that started in the 60s to work as Chicano artists, what are the relationships there, and how do you see yourself in that context?
Well, one of the things I found out when I started at the University of Washington and graduate school, and I was doing all this work, I wasn't interested in the political scene or the Chicano situation that was evolving. in a way, because I didn't feel honest enough to be part of this situation, which I knew very little about. Since I was living in the Pacific Northwest, there was hardly anybody of Mexican descent over there. And so it was mostly memories of my childhood that became important to me, my sort of like my background, where I come from, and the professors were they will discourage me to use intense colors because we live in the Pacific Northwest and we emulate the East, and here you are using these intense colors and all these things. But I'm like the salmon swimming against the current. I wanted to insist that all these things are very important. They're almost innate in me. I can control that. And now they are telling me that I'm one of the best artists, colorists, that, because of my use of color. And so I'm glad I rebelled, But I did fit in the situation of when the Tomás Ibarra and this woman Goldman,
Shifra
Goldman, came to visit me. I started becoming more conscious of the Chicano movement, and that's when I started doing portraits of Cesar Chavez. And of course, I have always admired Zapata and all these heroes from Mexico that are a big connection to the Chicano movement. But the thing that...
when did Tomás and, I'm sorry to interrupt, when did Tomás and Shifra went to visit you?
During the Cara exhibition, they came to the Pacific Northwest to find out which artists, Cecilia Alvarez and me, were chosen for that project. And she was in my home. To tell you the truth, I was very much excluded in anything visual because I wasn't painting these political scenes that were very prevalent in the Chicano art. And if you look now at the books that are being produced on Chicano art, you realize that there are so many people that are copiers, and you have like maybe 20 or 30 subjects on the Virgin of Guadalupe, and you have so many repetitions of the same idea, And I think that is so nice that we have to understand that the farm workers are sort of getting much more farther in the background as our people are going to university and getting more educated and finding out that there has to be something else to go to rather than the same thing over and over again. And so I'm very happy that I am, in a way, at that time, on the edge of this movement, because now inside the Chicano movement, some of the leaders are sort of following me, There's a lot of artists in Chicago, when they saw my exhibition, that found another way to express themselves. And I'm seeing that in a lot of parts of the nation now, a lot of people resort to patterns because they never thought of that. And I see patterns everywhere in our work, So I have had a little bit of an influence on that. But I am considered of no school, that I'm just Alfredo is his own school of painting, because really not many people used to paint like me. Now there are a lot of people that are following my steps.
When did you know that you wanted to be a visual artist?
Well, I was taken by my grandfather to the School of Fine Arts in Morelia as a child, and he convinced them, and they saw what I was doing, and they liked that I had a potential to become a good artist. So they allowed me to be there, and I used to do a lot of tricks on all the older serious artists. I will go and alter their paintings very subtly. And some of them wouldn't discover it, but when they did, they were furious. And I got spanked, actually spanked by the artist. And I quit, but the idea of being in that school at such an early age and being able to enter the sculpture department, the music department, listening to poetry at that age, made me think that that was heaven for me. And my father wasn't very encouraged by the idea of me becoming an artist in Mexico. He says, you're going to depend on me for the rest of your life. So I went into architecture. And when I came to the United States, that was the first thing I did. I entered at the University of Washington, I entered the School of Architecture. And I was excelling in the art. I was the best. And then somebody told me, why don't you change to interior design? And I said, is there more art in that? Yeah. And I went there for a year, and then they had an interior design convention at one of the major hotels, and I went to it, and I said, that's definitely not for me. I do not want to be an interior designer. So anyway, being there in the university, I said, hey, I live over here now. My father can't affect me anymore. And so I changed into the painting department, and I ended up with an MFA at the University of Washington.
On
And
studio art?
yeah, I wanted to teach, but I never had the opportunity. Well, I did for a year. I was able to teach. And then since I didn't have any other opportunities, I decided to become a very serious artist. And the funny thing about it is that my father now respects me and loved me so much that when I left Mexico, I was so resentful to my stepmother when I left, and I hated her, I thought. And then the years went by and started forgiving her, and all of a sudden, 2 years ago, she pulled me over and she says, Alfredo, I want to ask you a favor. Don't send any more visual things to your dad because we don't have any space left on the walls. The whole house is filled up. I will send him an invitation and he will blow it up and buy a $3,000 frame, these huge frames with these horrible reproductions. And the whole house is filled up with everything I send them, right? Wow. And I said, okay, I won't do that. And then I got that salmon print, and I did send it to him. So he calls me up and he says, I got the print, and you should see the frame I put on that thing. I said, by that, my stepmother tells me there was no more walls. The pictures of the family came down and your painting went up. So it's always such an interesting thing about poetic justice, Yeah. Then at the end, I end up loving this woman because she was such a good wife to my father, and everybody loved her. And every time I went to Mexico to visit, she treated me real well. So I became fond of her. So everything changed completely, And so it is, now my dad, we were sitting at dinner, and one of my sisters said, hey, Dad, remember the last time that 3 years ago when it was before that I got into the collection of the Smithsonian. They were honoring me in Washington, D.C., and I called him, and he had the whole family to talk to me on the phone. I mean, this is the success of an artist, It's not the other thing about selling and how many paints did you sell. It is all these wonderful things in between, that make you feel so good, so proud.
You started with architecture. What it was in the medium of painting that was so attractive to you? Because thinking of architecture, the first thing that would come to mind would be the selection of of another media, such as sculpture, for example. What was it in painting that you couldn't find in other media? And the second question related to this is if you think that there's any influence of what you learn in the career of architecture in your painting.
Well, you probably have seen a lot of the perspectives in some of my landscapes, which one of the first ones that I did, you have sort of like the perspective of the asphalt versus the jungle, the idea of civilization taking over, and the contrast between the two, and the structural thing that creates with the Renaissance and the formality versus a complete no north, no south, no up or down. This is a forest into which allows me to have all those goes, because the patterns could mix patterns of leaves and patterns of animals, patterns of something will help me create all these hide and seek aspect of my paintings. The reason I didn't go into sculpture was because I was fascinated by working, since I was a kid, the magic of creating something that looked three-dimensional and two-dimensional feeling of it. But then when I met my wife in the 80s, she was doing ceramics. And I got into ceramics, and I loved to do ceramics. And it was interesting, one of the curators that came to Seattle wrote one of my catalogs, David Schaff. He found my ceramics fascinated, so he gave me a show of ceramics in Washington, D.C., the only one I ever had. And I don't have that much time. It's more therapeutic to me to play with ceramics because I love the feeling, you know. And I did a series of iguanas that I loved. But it was very difficult at the time to go into ceramics because they will very easily break, you know. Some of the pieces, at that time they didn't have the technology to ship things like now. So I will always find out pieces that were broken and things like that. But I still love ceramics, and I would love to sculpt things. But it is so much demand of me to do painting now that I will have to allow myself perhaps a year or two to really get into that medium. Because I found out now that ceramics or three-dimensional things are not as easily acquired as a painting. It's a totally different aspect to it. And if you don't have the feel for it, they turn into mud. You know, there's nothing that comes out of it. And so I continue painting every day. And
have you tried to do printmaking?
I also have done printmaking a few times, especially when I went to self-help graphics to do a serigraph there.
What year was that one?
That was it 92 or something like that?
After
Yeah.
Cara.
The Cara exhibition, yeah. They chose 9 artists, and I was one of them, from 9 different regions of the country.
And that was your first experience with printmaking?
Yes, it was. It was very, very difficult because it's sort of a very exact thing, you know, and it's very tedious in a way that you have to cut every little piece, you know, to put it together like a jigsaw puzzle. And if you don't have that kind of thing, it's difficult, you know. Now that I know about it, I think in terms of doing a serigraph from the beginning, from my mind. And before that, I was thinking of doing a painting on paper, and it became very difficult, especially with the technology. There was a man in Seattle that had a gallery printmakers, and it took them to do one of my serigraphs 10 weeks, and they had 5 people working all day long to do that window of make-believe that you saw on the slide. And it was the most expensive serigraph. And of course,